How are those general strike talks going?
They are ongoing. They are ongoing. And like I'm going to address this really bluntly, right? Because there were many people, including folks in the media, who were hoping for an immediate general strike in the wake of Bill 2. And I used words like unprecedented response from the labor movement. And I would argue that what we're doing right now is unprecedented in terms of our response, because right now we have a labor movement that is actually making plans towards a general strike. There is no other province where that's happening right now. And I think it's also important for folks to understand that a general strike is illegal, and that if our members or non-union workers were to engage in a general strike, they would face fines similar to the fines outlined in Bill 2 and targeted against the teachers. So in that piece of legislation, they said anyone participating in an illegal job action would face fines of $500 a day. The union would be on the hook for fines of $500 a day for individuals, $500,000 for the union. With 51,000 teachers, one day of an illegal strike could add up to fines of $25 million. So those kind of fines exist in the labor code and could be levied against workers in the event of a general strike. So, like, I want to put this in a historical context for folks, because this is a really important issue that needs to be addressed, right? To help understand why we're working towards a general strike and haven't called one yet, okay? So, and bear with me, because I'm going to walk you through a little bit of history here, okay? So after the end of the Second World War, there was a wave of wildcat strikes. These were illegal strikes. They shut down major industries, especially in the auto sector. And by design, they were very disruptive. And they were, the catalyst for those strikes was after the war, our returning troops, quite rightly, expected to have a better life for themselves after they had just fought successfully for democracy. And there was this groundswell of labor militancy, okay? But it was disruptive for the economy, and the government of the day, industry of the day, basically said, how do we make this stop? And they entered into negotiations with the labor movement, our predecessors, and they came up with what we call the Great Compromise, which is that we created a framework for labor relations where strikes could happen, but in a very narrowly prescribed set of circumstances. So in Canada, and we are a democracy, but we have some of the most draconian restrictions on the right to strike in the entire Western world. Okay, so as a result of this Great Compromise, we created this framework where workers could only exercise their right to strike in the context of a unionized workplace, after a collective agreement had expired, after they had gone through negotiation, mediation, and in some cases arbitration, after they had had a supervised strike vote, and then after they had gone through what we call a 2-week cooling off period, and then also given 72 hours strike notice, okay? That is the only time under Canadian law, whether it's here in Alberta or across the country, where workers can actually legally strike, okay? When we look across the ocean at Europe, and we see big general strikes in places like France or Italy or Germany, the reason those happen is not because the workers are more militant, or it's because general strikes across sectors are seen as a democratic right, as extension of their right to freedom of expression or freedom of association. It's actually written into their constitutions. Here, in exchange for the Great Compromise, we got this framework for bargaining, and we were given tools, those tools I just mentioned, that we could use, and they included the right to strike. But here's the thing. Over the years, in multiple provinces, with successive governments, the tools that we've been given, including the right to strike, have been degraded to the point that they've been weakened to the point that they're almost useless. And this is not just Alberta. We saw the federal government using Section 107 of the Labor Code to strip the right to strike from most recently flight attendants, before that rail workers, port workers. And this is what's happening in not just in Alberta, but in Canada right now, that the Great Compromise, that where we said we'll give you labor peace in exchange for a framework for bargaining that actually guaranteed balanced and fair outcomes, it has been degraded to the point that the tools in the toolbox that we were given are no longer working. And so when we have a provincial government who goes one step further and says we're going to invoke the notwithstanding clause to strip you of the right that's been given to you by the courts through the Constitution to actually engage in a strike, that's the last straw. And so when I say that what's happening here in Alberta is unprecedented, it's unprecedented because the UCP has broken the last straw on the Great Compromise that gave us labor peace and allowed unions to help build a middle class for the last 80 years. Okay, so that straw has been broken, and now we are actually having conversations as a labor movement about putting aside these degraded tools in the toolbox that we've had that's worked for generations, and saying that toolbox has been degraded to the point where we actually have to think about going back to the kind of labor militancy that we saw before the Great Compromise. Okay, and so I know that that's a boring, long history lesson, but it's significant. It's an epoch has ended. Okay, Daniel Smith ended the epoch of labor peace brought to us through the Great Compromise of the end of the Second World War. She's thrown it in the trash heap of history. Okay, and now we have unions in this province actually saying the tools that we've been given to establish labor peace and to allow fair negotiation, they've been degraded to the point that they don't work. And so now we're forced to actually think about going outside of that box. Okay, now I know that was a very long answer, and it's one of those things that doesn't fit in sound bites, but for those who keep saying, well, where's the unprecedented action? That's the unprecedented action. Our unions are sitting together and talking about what happens after the Great Compromise. And what happens after the Great Compromise will be a new kind of labor militancy and a new kind of worker power. And those conversations are starting here in Alberta. Our Federation of Labour has actually formally established a committee called the General Strike Committee, okay? And it is meeting now to talk about what a general strike will look like in the wake of Bill 2, in the wake of the UCP's use of the notwithstanding clause to strip workers of rights, and in the lead up to the next provincial election, right? So this is an epoch change, okay? I want to emphasize that. I know it's in the weeds, but it's important for people to understand the context.